This past week, the London Board of Education squashed a motion by trustee Robin Ainsley to remove a gay-lesbian parenting workshop from an upcoming family conference. For those who initiated the motion, say it was an attempt to get public input and set board policy before proceeding with a controversial program. Others say the motion was nothing more than discrimination against homosexual parents. But if the outcome was clear-cut, a resounding 18-2 defeat, the controversy may not be gone. Similar motions could visit other boards and other places. Good evening, I'm George Clark. Welcome to Inquiry and our discussion on education surrounding gay parenting. Joining me tonight, Louise Karch, representing the Relationship Recognition Task Force, a homosexual rights group. Ms. Karch, you view the question as one of human rights rather than one of special rights.
Of course. And you mentioned the term human rights. I want to do something alternative because we've been talking about alternative lifestyles all week, and that's this. I'm going to sing you a bit of a song, and it goes like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Now we know this song. We know the song because we've sung it in houses of worship. We know the song because civil rights groups have been singing it. But what you might not know is the history of this song. John Newton wrote this song after this experience. He was the captain of a slave ship, and he left Africa with a cargo of Africa's finest people. And he had a divine revelation that what he was doing was wrong, and he wrote that song. But he did something else. He turned around, and he took those people back to Africa and gave them their freedom. This motion was a really interesting motion, and what it was doing is it was turning the ship not back to freedom, but forward, and people have been talking about democracy, but forward in a way that was going to take away democracy. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight because I think it's a very interesting one.
Thank you. Robert Metz is a member of the Freedom Party and a candidate for London Board of Education in the upcoming election. Mr. Metz, you argue that public funds should not be spent on workshops or projects such as this?
Well, not strictly that alone. I think parents should have a say in where their tax dollars are being spent. I find it amazing that someone would suggest that Trustee Ainsley's motion would take us back to the days of slavery, when in fact what I really witnessed at the board on Tuesday night was a really gross failure to communicate on part of the board. I mean, we constantly hear that the board is engaged in efforts to improve communications with parents, but it seems that by what we saw on Tuesday night, that communication be a one-way communication only. And I find it atrocious that to suggest that by giving parents a say, that's all they were asking for was input before a policy is developed. To suggest that that's taking us back to the days of discrimination and slavery was an insult to everyone there.
All right, David Brownstone represents the AIDS Committee of London. Mr. Brownstone, as someone involved in counseling young gays and lesbians, what is your reaction to removing the parenting workshop, the attempt to do that?
Sure. I was involved in a process actually in March of this year where the Board of Education held an equity symposium. It was funded by the Ministry of Education, and what they did was, in looking at communication, they involved 250 members of the community, members of the student population, teachers, board members, and members of the community at large, to look at the issue of equality in the school system and equity. And out of this symposium were a number of recommendations. And the final recommendation that they made was, and this is a quote from the document, is, quote, "Different issues matter in different ways to different people, but at the heart of it all is inclusion. All of us, whatever our sex, race, ethnic background, religion, sexual orientation, ability, class, or family structure, need to be treated with dignity and respect. We need to have our experience and realities valued and reflected in the world around us." And finally they say, "It is especially important that our schools provide a safe and equitable environment, conducive to bringing out the best in each learner."
All right, thank you. Debbie Normand is a parent and supply teacher who has definite views on the defeat of the motion and of the gay parenting workshop. Mrs. Normand.
My difficulty is not with the homosexual community. My difficulty is with the trustees of the London Board of Education. Trustees are elected to serve and to represent the views of the community. They say the door is always open and that they are accessible. Parents knocked on that door last Tuesday evening desiring dialogue, and that door was slammed shut in their faces. It's not a matter of anyone's private agenda. It's not a matter of anyone's personal lifestyles. I'm concerned about the breakdown of the democratic process. Discussion before decisions are made cannot be granted selectively to special interest groups alone, but must include all parents. It's no wonder some of us parents refer to the boardroom down there as the dead zone. No one seems to be alive or listening down there. Are the trustees parent-phobic?
All right, thank you. And a footnote to our introductions, Trustee Robin Ainsley declined our invitation to appear on this evening's program. Is democracy what is in question here?
Absolutely. Certainly democracy to the extent that parents and taxpayers in the whole city are being forced to pay for an education system through their property taxes, to deny them input, and then to go further than that, to suggest that in order to support that denial of input, we're going to accuse all the people that want it of being homophobic, of having discriminatory tendencies, when that is clearly not the case, just totally, you know, focuses the issue on the wrong issue. And I think we've been seeing for years now an increasing desire on the part of parents of all persuasions, of all beliefs, of all values, to have more input into the education that their children want. I really don't know what the other side in this issue is afraid of. Where is the guarantee that if parents had input into this issue, that anything would turn out differently in the end anyway?
Mr. Metz, I think your comment about democracy is really interesting. Both of you have talked about a failure to communicate and a desire for dialogue. That's what the workshop is. It's an opportunity. There are workshops of all kinds of families, and I'm not quite sure that that's a problem. I think if you want input, that's a perfect place to do it. By saying, let's not have the workshop, to me, that goes against what you're saying. And I too believe the importance of dialogue and to communicate. And I want to say a little bit something about democracy, because I love democracy. And it's a wonderful experiment, and we're always trying to make it work. And the Oxford Dictionary has a little definition, which is divine. It says, government by all people, direct or representative, form of society ignoring hereditary class distinctions and tolerating minority views.
Well, may I ask you a question then? If the workshop was a forum for input, why didn't the trustees just say that to the people in the gallery? Issue would have been solved right then and there.
They did say that. In fact, I taped the whole conversation, all the speakers, and that certainly came out that evening.
That did not come out, I'm afraid. I'm afraid all we heard was speeches on the evils of discrimination. We saw total unauthorized labeling of everyone in the crowd as being homophobic, as being having a Christian agenda. We saw trustees like Linda Freeman expressing that you have to go through the due process. But, you know, if we take the motion as it was given, we have been told by the motion and in the follow-up information I found afterwards that parents have not yet been heard from on this issue.
We don't need a policy on this issue. We don't need a policy on Native Canadians. We don't need a policy on Asian Canadians. The school board is governed by the laws of the province. In 1986, the Human Rights Code was amended to include sexual orientation. That was a democratic process. That went to the legislature. You had a democratic process. The vote happened, and it didn't pass. This isn't over. People have an opportunity to have input into the school system every day in thousands of ways. Program committees running for trustees. So this isn't a failure in democracy, it's a challenge, and I hope we can keep to that challenge.
Well, again, we're back to the situation of, you know, I have to ask, what is the problem then? Why were the trustees so angry at what was going on there? Why did they react with such a vengeance? I mean, no one in the audience there that I heard sitting around me could even relate to the way that the trustees were reacting to Robin Ainsley's motion.
Perhaps
the motion just asked for parental input.
No, that's not the motion. You're misrepresenting the motion. The motion, David, do you want to take this?
The motion says, whereas the London Board of Education has not developed a policy covering the area of homosexuality and alternative lifestyles, and whereas the public has not had the opportunity to provide input into any such policy, be it hereby resolved that until such policy has been developed and approved by the board shall not engage in, sponsor, or otherwise advocate any activity, conference, or program dealing with the issue of homosexuality or alternative lifestyles.
And may I make the comment that I felt that the workshops were dealing with more than whether or not to repaint the floor of the classroom. We were dealing with a fundamental issue. We were dealing with a very sensitive issue. They knew it was a controversial issue. Certainly, the parents do not expect to be consulted on every workshop that will take place, but they must be consulted on controversial, sensitive issues such as this one. And I think the board knew that ahead of time, and I think they had predetermined their response to that evening. Peter Jaffe made the statement that, why are you people all here tonight? Why this issue? Why select out this issue? He misrepresented the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter was that parents have been heard on many other issues, and I spoke to many parents who left that place shaking their heads in disgust. They had been sent home survey after survey asking their opinion on the report cards. parents had been conferencing with teachers in the halls. They gave their input in the proper forum. All we asked for that night was the proper forum. We asked for debate. Peter Jaffe said, I don't know why you're all here on this one. We want to tell him why we're here. He didn't want to listen.
No.
All right, well, if I can at this point,
sure.
take a short break for commercials and we'll be right back for the rest of the discussion.
Okay.
Debbie, are the 26 topics that were going to be, workshops that were going to be dealt with in the teachers' workshops, I'm wondering how the parents happened to gather together and focus and attend this particular board meeting to discuss it.
On this particular issue,
Mm-hmm.
this was an issue that was reported in the London Free Press. The parents, I'm sure, felt we have to read it in the paper. We weren't consulted on this. The word spread, people talk to each other, people use their own networks. The truth will always find a way of getting out. People found out what was going to be discussed down there. They felt, we haven't been consulted prior to this, we're going down to make our views known. And I really felt that the homosexual community did themselves a big disservice in going along with the trustees and not wanting this debate, because had they been willing to abide by the community standards that would have been evidenced in an honest debate, they would have shown to the community that they were willing to abide with whatever verdict the community brought.
Community standards.
The community must determine the standards.
All righty. There's a lot of law and legislation in the area that governs the standards for the country and the province and the education system.
And I think we saw quite clearly, and this was referred to earlier, when by an overwhelming majority and via the Democratic avenue of discussion with their MPPs, and that was allowed, people made their feelings on Bill C-167, the so-called Equal Rights Bill, quite known. That avenue was not denied to them. The people responded. They spoke to what they wanted. That was granted. The debate was closed. That was the end of the issue. I see this as a special interest group is trying to promote a special agenda, and
you know, we're both special interest groups. And
we are,
that's the
so
beauty
that's
of
why
the
everyone
public.
should have been
and what we
involved in
have,
it.
Debbie, what we have is a public school system, and it can't choose what kind of family its children go to that school. It can't say, we will only teach families that are Christian values or not Christian values, or Buddhist values, or what have you. The beauty of the public school system is it's just that, it's public. This is the International Year of the Family. It's a celebration of all the forms of the family. And that's what that workshop was going to do, is just to say there are all different kinds of families, and as teachers, we need to acknowledge that. It's not a question of whether one family is better than another, and it's not.
Well, precisely, and this is what really got me scratching my head on Tuesday night after listening to all the trustees speak. I was left with a distinct impression, as you say, that unless we go ahead with this workshop, people from the gay community are not being treated with dignity and respect in the schools. It was as if they were saying...
Thank you. That is absolutely true. We are not being treated with dignity and respect. Thank you.
This is why, precisely, an input forum is needed, so that you can bring this message not just to the trustees, but to the other people like Debbie here and other parents who are in the group, so that they can hear this message directly from you as well. I think that the whole issue here was one...
we need the workshop then, don't we? We need the workshop.
We need a public input, yes.
That's the workshop,
But that was never, ever described to myself or to anyone else in the audience. And this is why I say that Tuesday night meeting was a gross example of a failure to communicate by the board.
I think
the board is not communicating
beautifully. They said, we are not doing this motion. Let me tell you, it is quite common knowledge now that Robin Ainsley saw this workshop and decided, and it's interesting she's not here tonight, decided that it had to be stopped. And so she used the democratic process, which is her right, to see if she could stop that process, see if she could stop this workshop in particular. Now, it's well known she faxed different organizations, and in fact, when I call the London Gospel Temple, I can get a fax back of what was sent out, in terms of how people voted and people's comments on those votes. Not comments directly, but just, you know, little exclamation points and so on. So I want you to know that we're both special interest groups, that we both have things we believe strongly about. And so that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop you from speaking or you're going to stop me from speaking.
Then excuse
so
me, I'd
don't
like to
stop
say,
my community from talking about their families. You know what? We're not parent-phobic, but you are not creating an environment for them to be the best parents they can be and to teach their children love and respect and safety just like our schools should be doing.
Then my comment to that is, why was your group consulted prior to the
My group
workshop
wasn't
and the
consulted.
others were not?
My group
why,
was not consulted.
Why were members of the homosexual community
Robin
allowed
Ainsley
to
didn't
take
fax
place?
me to invite me to
I'm not
this
talking
gathering.
about Robin Sachs. I'm talking about the discussion that must have gone on prior to setting up a workshop. Why was that not inclusive of all the community? Why were we not consulted? We're consulted on report cards, we're consulted about whole language, we're consulted about many issues. That was not one of them.
The board was focusing on the diversity of the family. And one of the issues that they recognize in terms of diversity is that there are children in the school system who have parents who are gay or lesbian. And I think that in recognizing that, they need to include that in the workshop.
Okay.
One of 26 different workshops. And part of it to recognize is this isn't an issue of whether it should or shouldn't happen. This is an issue that is already they're dealing with in the board.
Yeah.
And so to better prepare the teachers and those in the school system who are dealing with the diversity of families is to give them as much education as they can, and that's what this forum is about.
This is what I'm wondering about, is how do you teach a gay child or a child who has gay parents or gay guardians science differently or math differently or any of the other subjects differently? Like, are they being treated different in the classroom?
Well, you yourself
Because
said that gays and lesbians aren't receiving dignity or respect
No, you
in the
said
school
that,
system.
and I
you
said
did,
that
and
was,
I said thank you.
That was the impression I got
Was-
from the trustees.
Right, so
In
what
other
what
words,
they have
they're
to do...
admitting that under their jurisdiction, the gay community is being treated unfairly.
Correct.
And I thought that was a devastating admission, but they didn't make it clear where this unfairness was taking place, and I think that everyone's wondering where.
I think what the admission is that it's happening, and they're receiving reports back that this is an issue that has to be dealt with.
Give me an example. Give me an example of someone from the gay community who's been treated unfairly in the classroom. I've never heard of one yet.
Have you ever heard Erin Cardy-Ellison speak? She's a wonderful speaker. She won an award at her school for being an outstanding student leader. And she was one of the people who protested when gays and lesbians weren't included in the equity symposium. She has very specific examples of discrimination in the classroom. When Bill 167 failed, she took that hard, just like anybody in our community
But how
would.
does
And
this
she was told
discrimination
to
take
just
place?
buck up. If you don't know what discrimination is,
Well, in
that
the
is something
classroom.
you're going to have to examine to be a good political representative.
Exactly, now you're asking.
Good.
That's the
Well,
reason
I
I
just gave
came
you an
here,
example.
and I think...
just gave you an example.
Well, you said they couldn't participate in a symposium.
Right, so that's
Okay.
a lack of democracy, isn't it?
Well, right, just as the parents
so
are
that's
being denied
discrimination. Is that
a
discrimination?
participation. Absolutely,
Good.
just
So I
as the
gave you an
parents are being
example?
discriminated
Did I give you an
against.
example?
But not in
Did
the
I give
classroom.
you an example?
Yes,
Work
but
with
not
me
a
here.
classroom
Good.
example, which is what I asked for. I
That
asked
was
for
a classroom example. That affected her ability to be a learner in her classroom. If she knows that she is in an environment that doesn't like her at all, that doesn't accept who she is in a climate that can't possibly foster the brilliance that she was born with. Her ability to learn is inhibited by a climate that can't stand her. This is not bringing out the best in our people.
How does
This
she
doesn't help our
perceive that?
economy at all.
How does this person perceive that
I'd
ill
be
feeling
happy to
towards
set up a meeting with you and Erin because she can articulate her experience as a youth in the school system.
But I'm debating you right now, and
Yes,
I'd like
but you
you
asked
to
me for an
articulate this
example.
answer to me. You see, these
Go
things
ahead.
aren't known to a lot of people. I'd like to know in a classroom, if somebody's being taught math or being taught science or being taught geography, how are they being discriminated against in any way? How does the teacher even know what a person's sexual persuasion is? I don't think the whole issue of sexual persuasion, whether heterosexual, homosexual, or any lifestyle, should even be part of the classroom within those contexts.
So maybe we don't need input then, do we? We can
Maybe
acknowledge
not.
that. Exactly.
Maybe
thank
we're
you.
wasting our tax dollars on all
So,
of these symposiums and
Not
things.
wasting our tax dollars in symposium, but maybe we can just acknowledge that families are an absolutely amazing thing. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a good point to leave it on, and we'll be right back after these messages.
So I'm taking...
David, you work counseling young gays and lesbians. Is it your impression there is a need for more understanding from teachers in the school system?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of the experiences of young people in the school system, the kind of exclusion that they experience, not only in terms of the classroom not including any kind of dialogue about the experience of gays and lesbians, but also in terms of the way that they're treated by other teachers, by other classmates, and the way, in a sense, that discrimination is sanctioned because people turn the other way when it happens. They don't deal with it. There are countless examples of people who I've dealt with over the years who are young people in the school system, whether it be through name-calling, through harassment that they receive physically, let alone the emotional harassment that people experience throughout the school system, plus the issue that dropout rates and unfortunately teenage suicide rates among young people that is somewhat sanctioned by people turning the other way and not looking at the fact.
Excuse me,
Gay
could I
lesbian
speak
youth.
to that, please?
Sure.
I'm a teacher, and I find that teachers are a pretty sensitive, caring group. They care about their students. The things we put up with in a day, we wouldn't be there if we didn't care.
So how would you respond to a young person?
Okay, I'm about to get to that. I think you can handle this the same way you handle any other form of harassment or discrimination. The sweet little girl who gets the blonde jokes, the cute little boy who's chubby, the same type of sensitivity has to be brought in here.
So if a young boy
we do not need to take tax dollars at a time when, may I just bring in here, the board has already stated their priorities: literacy, numeracy, higher level thinking, problem solving. We do not need to be taking tax dollars. I feel sorry for every group that is maligned. I don't think the public, from what I heard, wants their tax dollars spent on this and this and this and this and this. International test scores reveal that we are number 1 or 2 in terms of spending, and our scores are in the bottom third of the pie.
If I can ask you, how about Ozzie and Archie and Al, television in the family, spirituality in the family, cultural diversity in the family, 3 of the other topics?
Mm-hmm.
Those were worth spending the money on, though, I suppose?
I think that the board has said what their priorities are: literacy, numeracy, higher level thinking, problem solving. Let's clean up our own house before we start spending money on other, maybe worthwhile causes, but let's address the central issue here. I see this as just another attempt to distract us from fundamental academic issues. These things, while they may be worthwhile, what's important? And I think it is very essential that the parents' concerns be addressed.
How can somebody learn about numeracy, literacy in an environment that doesn't support their being?
The same way that the little chubby blonde boy has to contend with harassment, the same way that anybody else does.
Issues of minority need to be expressed. As a minority person, an invisible minority person, how am I going to be supported if people can't recognize that I have problems?
As you said earlier, Louise, we're all members of a special interest group. That's part of learning and living, learning to cope, learning to deal with things.
But issues around race,
issues
around culture,
people.
Issues around sexism have been addressed to a certain degree. Issues around sexual orientation, in terms of a young person dealing with their own personal struggle, whether it be their own or in terms of the harassment from other people in the school system.
We're talking about gay and lesbian parents who send their children to school. We're not talking about gay and lesbian youth, although it's true there is a high dropout rate. That's telling that the school
gay and
environment.
Parents
yes,
now? We're not talking about the kids in the school anymore.
So the gay and lesbian children, okay, that's one part. David's talked about discrimination.
Right.
But the motion was an attempt to stop a workshop that was taught for gay and lesbian parents, talking about what their lives were, to help teachers be more sensitive. And you're right, teachers are quite sensitive. But sensitivity comes from knowledge. And let me say something else. You can't have education if you don't have justice, if you don't have an environment that allows people to be really present and whole. So if some kid's being teased because Heather's got 2 mommies, then she can't come into the
Inquiry,
classroom and learn.
bringing people and issues together. Join us again next week.